Good evening, folks. How are you? How we doing? Very good. I will soon be putting up our PowerPoint. I just want to check in with you on the video log and just chat a little bit about that before we move on to tonight's content. And it's hard to believe that tonight is the last night I'm actually going to be seeing you and teaching you. Davina will be taking over the course after next week. But if you have any questions on phonation, I'm the person to contact for that. So please be sure over the next week or two when you're doing the phonation content that you reach out to me if you have any questions. Just a couple updates from the video logs. Please review the syllabus for the video logs. There are instructions there about how to do them and any kind of point deductions for various elements of what you may be doing on the video. If you have a question on your grade, the syllabus also tells you what's required of you in order to ask for a regrade. Please note, the intention is not to penalize anyone, but if you ask me to regrade it, it means that I'm going to regrade it from the beginning, and that means that your grade could go up or down. But there are instructions there about how to do that. You need to tell me the right answer for the thing that you're talking about, the time on the video where you said that exact thing, so I know that you know what the right answer is and that you're actually telling me where in the video you gave that piece of information. Again, please be clear about the answers to the questions before you start, and then practice. You have to stay within the 2 minutes, folks. I know that the video is open to 2:05, but that's so that it just doesn't cut you off. Keep your video within 2 minutes. And I know that this can be done because it's been done with even less time than that. So just make sure you consolidate and you stay within that time frame. Since you're talking to me, it's okay if you use all of the jargon terms in our field to get the point across efficiently. I don't mind in this video that you're educating me. Videos generally get better over time, folks, so if your grade was not what you wanted it to be, please know that you have most of the points to recuperate in this class. So just keep practicing. The mean grade was a 7.5 out of 10, but there were a lot of 10s, so just to tell you, you can do it, keep working on it, and keep practicing it. To clarify some of the content so that you don't make, folks don't make these mistakes in the final summary video, I'm gonna go through some of the main things that people got tripped up with on the video. A few, on quite a number of video logs, folks talked about needing IRV only to talk on longer utterances. We always need IRV to talk, always. We cannot talk on a passive inhalation. We need to recruit those accessory muscles and take in a larger volume of air in order to talk. The longer utterances are ERV. So just know if we start going past our resting lung volume, then we have to recruit ERV. Quite a few people, when talking about increasing airflow, really only talked about pressure. And I want you to understand that there's a difference between airflow and pressure. It is true that they are correlated and they're related to one another. And we do need to increase pressure, but pressure is a reference of force. We also have to increase flow, which is a reference of the volume of air that is moving. And while they're related, please make sure that you, in your mind, understand that in order to overcome resistors, we have to increase the flow. We also have to increase the pressure. So make sure you talk about flow. Like the IRV being used to talk, we also always have to use checking action to talk, because we have to use checking action to begin the exhalation. So checking action is used for all speech, and we use it during the IRV phase. So not just for longer utterances. When we use longer utterances and we go into ERV, we're using the parallel to checking action, okay? What's called the expiratory parallel to checking action. So the other thing that is when folks got it wrong, when we are using checking action, we are maintaining contraction of muscles of inspiration, not muscles of expiration. Okay, so the checking action is holding the muscles that got us there in the first place, which are the inspiratory muscles. We only go into ERV on longer utterances, folks. We do not speak on ERV in the regular mode. In the regular mode, we're speaking on IRV. We only use ERV when we have to go into really long utterances. The final thing that I just want to remind everybody about is that our breathing, and then as we start to add on phonation and articulation, as we begin to add the systems on and you do the summary video log, this is an orderly process. Things cascade. And when you're explaining them, you need to make sure that you have the sequence in the right order. Otherwise, it doesn't always make sense when you're trying to educate your patient. So when we say that we take in an IRV, we use muscles to do that. So you want to make sure that you're explaining things in a very logical fashion and that you have them in the right order so that they make sense for how the functions work. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, very good. Folks, I want to strongly encourage you, if you got a lower grade on this video, do not let it get you down. Pick yourself up. It's 10 points out of 100 points. So if you got a 7, you only lost 3 points, which means if you got a perfect score in this class, you're still at a 97, okay? So do not get yourself mired in one grade. Pick yourself up, keep going forward, and practice and rehearse so that your next video is even better. Everybody good on that? Final thing on the videos, no pausing the video and no reading. It's very clear in the syllabus that reading results in a 0. I didn't give anybody a 0 this first go around because it's the first video. Do not read and don't pause the video because the goal is for you to give oral education. And when I'm doing that, I can't really pause myself when I'm talking to a client or to a colleague. I have to just talk to them. So the goal is to get you to learn this enough to be able to give it back to somebody in a 2-minute clip. Everybody good with that? Did you feel like you learned a lot through the exercise? Even though it might have been a stressful exercise and time consuming, do you feel like you can explain it? Good. And that's the goal, folks, because I want to tell you again, there may only be one class where you're going to get this information repeated to you. And quite frankly, this is something that I talk to patients about all the time. So if you're not going to get it again in graduate school, this is the one place where you're really going to learn it. So my goal is to have you really try to understand the basics to be able to explain it to another person. All right, we're going to move on now to phonation. And most of what I'm talking to you about tonight in phonation is stuff that you have heard me talk about already. Okay, I have recorded chats on this stuff. What I'm going to try to do is just guide you again and then answer any questions that you may have around the phonatory system. Hold on, I need to get my chat box up so I can see you all. Were the videos pretty clear on phonation? Does everybody feel comfortable so far with that? Very clear? Okay, hey folks, by the way, were the 2 practice quizzes, one for the final exam, I know you're not there yet, but was a practice quiz for the final exam, and then there was a practice quiz for the video. Were they helpful to you? It's helpful for me to know whether or not to keep that content. Yeah? Okay, very good, very good. And particularly the one for the video, was it helpful in organizing your thought sequence? Okay, good to know, because I want to make sure that you guys are getting what you need to be able to do the job that you're going to have to do eventually. All right, very good. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of voicing. And the word phonation, folks, means voicing. Different than the word phonemes, which are sounds in the linguistic system. phonetics, the way in which you produce those sounds, and then phonation, the voice. Is everybody comfortable with those three concepts? Are you familiar with these terms? I think we reviewed them on week 1, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, very good. Now, as you've probably learned already in Dr. Heisler's class, has she talked to you about some sounds having voice and some sounds not having voice? The parameters of sounds. There's 3 components to sounds that we generally talk about in speech pathology. I mean, there may be other things, but when we're talking about producing sounds, we talk about whether or not they're voiced, voiced or voiceless. And then we talk about 2 more parameters that go into articulation, which Davina is going to talk to you about. Place and manner. Exactly, Elia. Very good. We've got voice, place, and manner. Place and manner are going to be what you talk about in articulation. They happen in the vocal tract. Voice happens in the larynx. So this middle component, now our second system, we've talked about the respiratory system, breathing, lungs, diaphragm, accessory muscles. That's respiration. As the air comes up through the trachea is the windpipe. So we've got the lungs, it comes through the bronchi, there's 2 of them. Those bronchi merge into one bronchus, that's the lower airway, and that bronchus connects to the trachea. The trachea is the windpipe. We care about that for swallowing because we don't want food to get into the trachea. So the trachea is going to lead up into the larynx. And this is the structure we're talking about for voicing. Because within the larynx, as you learned, the vocal folds are housed. And the vocal folds are the structures associated with producing voicing. Okay? So the first parameter that we talk about with respect to sounds, to phonemes, is are they voiced or are they not? And you have probably learned from Dr. Heisler that all vowels are voiced. All vowels are voiced. About half of the consonants are voiced and half of them are non-voiced. So most consonants have both a voiced and an unvoiced correlate to them. So when we say b, 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 that is the voiced correlate to p, 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 okay? The manner and the place are identical. The difference between a b and a p is voice. They are otherwise produced in the same manner. Their manner is a stop. Their place is a bilabial. Have you learned those dimensions yet with Dr. Heisler? Okay, very good. So right now, what we're learning in this class is to map on to Dr. Heisler's class. She's teaching you about the sounds and the phonetic properties. My job is to teach you about the anatomy of how we do that. Okay, the anatomy of how we do it. Tonight is just about the vocal folds. So if I'm asking you in the video log about saying a particular word and I'm asking you about voicing on that particular word, or I'm asking you, we're not at pitch or volume yet, but if I'm asking you about sounds, you should use this chart to help you identify, is it a voice sound or a voiceless sound? Okay? The basics around that is, if it's a voiced sound, if we're going to generate a voice, we have to adduct the vocal folds. We have to bring them into the stream of air. And you can see in the top picture, that is the adducted vocal folds. Those vocal folds are going to come over the stream of air, and just like checking action, those posterior, so everybody, if you look at my fingers like this, where my fingertips are here are muscles that pull the vocal folds together. And those muscles will stay contracted, just like checking action. Does that make sense? So we're gonna adduct the vocal folds and we're gonna hold them over the stream of air. When you look at this abducted position, can you see those rings down below the vocal folds? Can you see that anatomy has like some rings down there? My arrow is pointing to them. You see the rings like this? Those are called tracheal rings. We are looking down into the windpipe, into the trachea. So you can see it's a round tube that never collapses because we're breathing. So it's always open like that. The only way to close that tube is to close the vocal folds on top of it. So when we close them, we still have the trachea underneath that has air coming up, that volume of air that is going to hit that resistor of the vocal folds. So we have to increase the volume because we are also increasing subglottal pressure. And when we do that, those little vocal folds are so pliable that they're going to start vibrating in the stream of air. Now you can see that the arytenoids back here are held tightly close together. They're open over here. So while we are engaged in what we call sustained phonation, ah, the entire time I'm doing that, these arytenoid muscles, the muscles that are holding these arytenoids together, are remaining contracted so that the air can blow and the vocal folds can vibrate. Remember, we're not opening and closing. We're keeping them closed, ah, and they're vibrating in the stream of air in this way. Does that make sense? Now, why is that important? When you start talking in your neurology course, you're going to want to know that we need neurological input to close them, and that neurology has to continue to fire in order to move the vocal folds. We're not opening and closing neurologically. We're keeping them closed, and the little folds are just vibrating in the wind. Where is subglottal pressure? It's underneath the glottis. So the space, this space, everybody, hold on, let me pull this up. This space between the vocal folds, this is not a good color. Let's see if yellow works better. This space between the vocal folds, the space, the name of it is called the glottis. So whether the glottis is open like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, the term for the space between the vocal folds is called the glottis. So subglottal pressure means underneath the glottis, underneath. So it's in the trachea. If the vocal folds are here and we close, we're creating pressure underneath. We have to create pressure, which is the resistance. The fact that the vocal folds are closed creates that pressure. But now we have to use muscular force to increase flow to move that air through the vocal folds. Does that make sense? So we close the vocal folds to generate pressure, but then we have to use our abdominal muscles to force the air out. Does that make sense? Is everybody comfortable with that concept? Okay, very good. Hold on, I have to get rid of the pen, otherwise it won't let me move on. Or it won't let me move on. All right. So in your videos, I'm going to try to move somewhat quickly through this, folks, because I've talked to you about this already in the chats. This is just to reinforce these concepts. So air is moving through the vocal folds while they are adducted, Lauren. Exactly. If they're abducted, we have a voiceless sound like this sound. Don't be confused. I know you hear air when I say it's not because of the vocal folds. It's because I'm creating constriction in the mouth. That's articulation. If you're not sure, put your finger just on your Adam's apple and push. You can feel the buzz on the Z. So when we do an S, the vocal folds are open. We're not going to be able to generate pressure because they're open. When we create the voice, we're going to close the vocal folds. We're going to take in an inhalation, close the vocal folds. That builds up pressure. Then we push muscles. We're going to contract muscles to push the air through the vocal folds so that they vibrate and they create a buzzing sound. Zzz, they create a buzzing sound. Does that make sense? Everybody got it? Okay. So let's move through this content and make sure we're all on the same page. In order to generate a voice, we have to do an onset phase. We have to do a tack. Now, under technical terms, scientists will call this a prephonatory phase, where we begin to move the vocal folds together. I'm just going to talk to you about the attack phase. That's bringing the vocal folds together, okay? So we bring them together. We're going to call that attack. We're going to bring the vocal folds together, and then we're going to vibrate them for our sound. So if I move from, so the attack would begin with the first voiced sound. Exactly. And your name is not up there. It just says M. That's exactly right. When we go to produce the first voice sound, so if I'm saying the word fun, the F sound is not voiced. So I have to keep my vocal folds in an abducted position. And folks, if I didn't say it or it wasn't clear, the vocal folds always start in an abducted position, because when we're breathing, when we're sitting at rest, our vocal folds are always open unless we are swallowing our saliva, which happens a lot. But if we're not doing that reflexively, our vocal folds are open so that we can breathe. So if the first sound is voiceless, we're not doing anything to the vocal folds. If I say fun, I'm gonna attack before the I'll attack before the because the vowel is voiced. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, the fun, if you do it and you feel your own throat and you go to the chart, you'll see that the vowel and the N are voiced. So we need to sustain phonation across those two sounds. That is maintaining the contraction in the arytenoid muscles in the back, the transverse and the oblique arytenoid muscles, in order to maintain those vocal folds in an adducted position. They'll continue to vibrate across the and the n. And then at the end of fun, if I'm done talking, I have to open the vocal folds back up so I can begin to breathe again. We go into what's called termination phase. We're going to terminate the phonation. Now we have to abduct the vocal folds. So we're going to stop adducting. Those muscles that got us adducting will relax, and then we will recruit the posterior cricoarytenoid, or the muscle that abducts, and pull the vocal folds out of the stream of air. So if instead of saying fun, I say enough, I'm going from a na voiceless sound, I need to terminate before the F, because I don't want to get enough. Enough, what would happen if I didn't terminate before the F? I would produce a V instead of an F, because the V is the voiced component of the F. Does that make sense to everybody? And we have patients who cannot do this properly, which is how we get articulation problems, especially in neurological patients. I'm not seeing people say yes, that they understand. So please let me know if you have questions. And it's okay, I just want to make sure that you're getting what I'm saying. If we change it from fun, the F has no voice. So we will not attack until the until the vowel. But if we change it to enough, we have to terminate before the F, because we attacked already. Does that make sense? So let's try this, folks. Let me hold on a second. Let's say our word is fun versus, and I'm going to spell it like this, folks, more phonetically, if you will, enough. Okay, I'm changing the order here. F is a voiceless sound. No voice. Our vocal folds are open because we're breathing. So we're going to attack here. And we're going to attack because these sounds are voiced. We're going to terminate here because we're no longer producing a voiced sound. Does that make sense to everybody? And you know what, Magda? Let's just leave prephonation out for now, because I don't want to confuse or add a layer. Is that okay? Let's just leave it out. Don't even worry about it. It's like, it's as the vocal folds are preparing to do something. But I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm going to ask you to talk about attack, sustained phonation, and termination. Okay, now when we reverse these sounds, folks, E is a vowel. So we have to attack before the E because we're breathing, so our vocal folds are open. When I want to say E, I got to attack to produce voice. I'm going to sustain phonation across this whole thing. And why am I doing that? This is the same thing, sustain phonation, because all these sounds are voiced. Voiced, voiced, voiced. Ina. Now, when I slow it down, you can hear that I keep my voice on the whole time. Ina. You can hear the voice. I need to terminate before the F. Why? Because the F is a voiceless sound. It's a voiceless sound. If I keep sustained phonation, I'm going to get a V sound because the V sound is the same manner and place as the F. The difference is voicing. So if I forget to turn my voice off, I'm going to get enough rather than enough. Does that make sense? So in this case, I have to terminate my voicing before the F sound. Does that make sense to everybody? Are there any questions on that? Does it help to see it like this? Okay, very good. So again, this vocal fold abduction, think down here how important it is to move your vocal folds in and out of the stream of air, because it's the difference, for instance, between the word bat, voiceless, this one is voiceless, and bad, voiced. The manner and the place are the same for these sounds. The difference is one is voiced and one is not. And that comes down to a millisecond of timing in a millimeter of space of what you're doing with the vocal folds. If they don't do what you want them to do in a millimeter of space, in a millisecond of timing, you're going to get the wrong sound. And then that's going to change the meaning of what we're doing. So termination phase is after N in fun. Yes, Daniel, absolutely. It's after N in fun. So this is fun. And this is enough. Make sense? Okay, so we're gonna attack before the U because it's a vowel and the F is voiceless, and terminate after the N. In enough, we're gonna attack before the vowel and we're gonna terminate before the F because it's voiceless. Is anyone not clear on this concept? Anyone not clear on this concept? Termination would be after a voiced sound at the end of the word or before a voiceless sound. Exactly, Magda. Can everybody read the chat box? Can you all see the chat box the way that I can? Just one person answer. Okay, stop. So okay, good. So you can see Magda's response here. Termination happens after a voiced sound at the end of a word or before a voiceless sound. Okay, before a voiceless sound. Make sense? Everybody good on this concept? All right, here we go. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so we're gonna, so attack and termination require muscular action. And this is gonna be important when you move into the fall courses, because in the fall, you're gonna be taking a neuroscience course. And that neuroscience course is gonna teach you about how we control the vocal folds from the brain, right? So the brain has to do something for vocal attack and termination. We're gonna have to send signals to certain muscles because there's muscular activation. But during sustained phonation, the only thing that has to happen is that that neuron has to keep firing to maintain the contracted position. So sustained phonation is simply maintaining the posture in its contracted state, much like checking action. Is anybody confused on that concept? All that makes sense? Okay, so how we're going to use our vocal folds for speech production. Does everybody remember our two parameters? We're going to talk about pitch and we're going to talk about volume. The vocal folds otherwise, folks, all they're doing is vibrating. They vibrate and they create a buzz. And I know that I'm completely nerding out here. Please forgive me. You should be amazed that you can understand what I am saying to you, because the anatomy is really doing, the anatomy is simply contracting or not contracting, and your brain is perceiving all of these sounds as meaningful units. The vocal folds do adduction, abduction, tensing, and relaxing. That's the thing that they do. When they adduct, they vibrate. When they abduct, they don't. They have no role. Okay? Abduct, adduct, vibrate. That's going to help us with volume. Tensing and relaxing will help us with pitch. And those parameters alone give us a huge component of our speech sounds and how we understand speech production. So the first component is the component of pitch. And we talk about that as like musical notes. But folks, you have to know that I don't mean that in singing. We mean that in like how fast or slow the vocal folds are vibrating, because it tells us something about the sound. Different sounds have different pitches, and different people have different pitch parameters to their vocal folds. So pitch is the first component of sounds. And is everybody comfortable on this particular component of raising pitch? I think when you click on, if you see that highlight, folks, did anybody click on this and see the video associated with it? Can you guys see my screen? Can you see my video here? Can you see the video now? No? Okay, let me change the screen over. I don't know if you all know, I'm on the PowerPoint right now, and if you click on these things that are underlined here, folks, I have given you links so that you can see, did anybody discover this on their own? It's a hyperlink, okay? It's a hyperlink. And it shows you how the vocal folds are going to move. Can you guys now see my screen with the vocal folds? Okay, so let's watch this. Watch the vocal folds. Try to measure where they are. You can see, try to eyeball it or put your cursor. Here they are here, and here they are here. Let's watch what's going to happen to them as this person increases pitch. Can you see them lengthening? Okay, so I've given you some hyperlinks so that you can look at some of this and try to get an idea of what it looks like. Make sense? So when we are raising pitch, we are doing that by muscles of longitudinal tension. We're gonna tense the vocal folds. So we contract muscles that actually cause them to tense. And folks, listen carefully. When you do your videos, please make sure that you understand the relationships. This part of me telling you about sequencing things is very important. When we contract muscles of tension, muscles of longitudinal tension, it increases the tension in the vocal folds. It will then increase their length. When we increase their length, that causes the mass to decrease. When we increase the length, it causes the mass to decrease per square area. That will cause the vocal folds to vibrate at a faster rate. And that's how our brain will perceive a higher pitch. Ah. So we're going to stretch the vocal folds. When the vocal folds stretch, pitch goes up. So we increase tension, that increases their length, that decreases their mass, that increases their vibratory rate, and that increases pitch. It should go in this order, folks, as you're thinking about it. So it is because we tense them that they lengthen. And because they lengthen, they decrease in mass. And because of those things, we increase the vibratory rate. That's the order in which it happens. And the cause and effect is important to know. We don't increase vibratory rate and then increase tension. That's not the way it works. Vibratory rate increases because those other things happen. Is everybody understanding that concept? We contract the cricothyroid muscle, yes, and the vocalis. Very good, Magda. That's exactly right. The two muscles of increasing pitch are the cricothyroid and the thyroarytenoid vocalis. Some people call it short the vocalis. And those are the two muscles that will raise pitch. Okay, moving on. When we increase tension, we actively recruit muscles that tense. In relaxing, we're then going to relax those muscles, and then we also are going to recruit muscles that relax, okay? So relaxing involves active recruitment of muscles of relaxation, but remember, if you went up, ah, to go down, ah, I have to relax the muscles that we're tensing and then recruit the relaxers. And so you'll remember that everybody has one recruiter, some relaxer, one relaxer. Some people have two. Do you guys remember that? Do you remember the muscles of relaxation? Increasing vibratory rate increases pitch. The only thing that goes down is mass. The only thing that goes down is mass. As we relax and shorten them, they get plumper. Folks, maybe the best way to think about this is if you weigh 150 pounds, if you're longer, no, I don't want to say that. Forget it. Forget it. I'm taking it back. I don't think it's a good analogy. Okay. So increasing in vibratory rate will cause, increasing tension, increasing length, decreasing mass, all result in increasing vibratory rate, and that results in a higher pitch. Make sense? Go in the order that I've given it to you on the slide. Okay? Relaxation is achieved by intrinsic muscles of relaxation and just those elastic properties of allowing the tensors to relax over time. Okay, and this is just a diagram of that. Longitudinal tension lengthens them, medial compression closes them. Everybody comfortable so far? Anything I need to re-explain? All right, here we go. Second component, volume. Ah! Getting louder. We're going to use that for speech. Hey, stop! Or just regular lexical stress. We're going to use it for regular lexical stress. The way to do that is that we have to generate power. There's a couple of things that we have to do. Three main things. We have to increase subglottal pressure. We have to adduct the vocal folds and hold them in that closed phase for a longer time. And then we have to increase the amplitude of the waveform by generating more flow through the system. So we're going to take in a larger volume of air, We're going to, so that's an IRV, and we have to engage in checking action. Remember respiration. So in order to yell, everybody right now, just try this example. You don't have to do it. Think about yelling across the room. Hey! I have to take in a large inspiratory reserve volume of air, and I got to check it in my chest and hold it when I'm going to yell. I'm going to contract the muscles of adduction because I got to get the vocal folds into the stream of air, and I'm going to hold them in the closed phase for a longer period of time. When I tightly close them and hold them there, that allows me to build up pressure. I've already taken a large volume of air in, and now I'm closing the system, which if I close the system and don't let the air out, that generates subglottal pressure. As I start increasing the flow of air through the vocal folds, I press that air very forcefully. Hey, I'm increasing that flow of air. It's gonna cause the vibratory pattern, the vocal folds, to have a larger amplitude. It's going now, remember, they vibrate over the stream of air. So if I say, hey, 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 versus hey, 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 really, I'm increasing their flow. Just think about pushing a door open. If you pushed really hard, the amplitude or the waveform that it would create would be much bigger. If you're in California, which most of you said you were, or if you've been to the ocean, it's like a wave. The bigger the amplitude of the wave, right? The bigger, the more crashing it's gonna be. All of that results in an increased volume or loudness. Those words are synonymous, increased volume or loudness. Does that make sense to everybody? So I got to take in a large inspiratory reserve volume of air. I'm going to check it. I got to hold it. When I adduct the vocal folds, I hold them in a closed face tightly. That large volume of air and the vocal folds help me generate subglottal pressure. Now I have to use muscular force in the abdomen. Hey! And if you do it, you'll feel your abdomen. I'm going to increase flow. That's going to blow the vocal folds open and magnify their amplitude, and all of that results in what my brain perceives as an increase in volume or an increase in loudness. Okay, and you can see it here in this kind of wave. A soft sound, there's the amplitude. A loud sound, a much larger amplitude. Okay, I've basically said the same thing. I'm going to move on from here just to make sure that in our last couple minutes together, 15 minutes, that we understand how we're going to use this. First of all, we're going to use basic properties of adduction and abduction to simply mark the parameter of sounds about voicing. They're voiced or they're voiceless. They're voiced or they're voiceless. It is so rudimentary. It's like a gross rudimentary thing. I have voice, I adduct the vocal folds, and they create a buzz. I don't have voice, I don't adduct the vocal folds, and there's nothing happening. Okay? So the first parameter of sounds is, are they voiced or are they not? And that is about the speech sound itself. That's about the phoneme. Does the phoneme have sound or does it not? But now we're going to use the vocal folds not only for the parameter of voicing or non-voicing, we're also going to use the vocal folds to help us with an element of marking language. Okay? So right now we were talking about the sounds themselves, which is language, but we're going to use that voicing. We're going to use what the vocal folds can do to help us communicate on a larger scale. And that is known as the suprasegmental aspects. I know I recorded this for you already. If you've ever heard the term prosody or pragmatic kind of things, it has to do with prosody and marking language stress. So we're going to use our vocal folds to use for pitch and intensity to mark word classes like nouns and verbs, to mark what sentences mean. Are they declarative sentences? Are they inquisitive sentences? And then we're also going to use the vocal folds to mark things like emotion. So when we talk about real language, like language, the nuts and bolts of language, we're going to use pitch and intensity, for example, to mark word stress. The difference between the word content and the word content has to do with what the vocal folds are doing to mark pitch. Content, content. I'm increasing pitch and I'm increasing volume, even if your brain can't yet perceive it, because maybe you're not yet skilled at listening as an SLP. I'm telling you, by definition, when we stress a syllable, and I'm sure you learned this in grade school about stressing a syllable. When we stress a syllable in English, We stress it by increasing pitch and increasing volume. Content, content. We do that by increasing pitch and increasing stress. The difference between doing it on the first syllable and the second syllable actually in the English language changes that word from one word class to another. Content is a noun. Content is an adjective. Are you content with the content? And if you don't get that right, are you content with the content? That doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make sense linguistically. So what we're doing with the vocal folds to increase the pitch and decrease the pitch is helping us understand the language. So increasing the intensity is correlated with increasing. Magda, it's a good question. No. First, intensity and pitch are separate. But in most people, we have a hard time separating them. Most often, when we increase pitch, we are also increasing intensity, especially when we get to the height. Ah, most of us are also increasing our intensity to get that out or increasing pressure. But I want you to understand as a skilled practitioner, these things dissociate. And in skilled voice users like singers, singers know how to increase their pitch without increasing their volume, or increasing their volume without increasing their pitch. Very often, because we're in such close and tight space with the vocal folds, most of us don't have that fine-grained control. But we can do it if we practice, and they are operated from different muscles under different conditions. It's an excellent question, but you should think about them as separate. For most of us, we have a hard time not separating them, okay? Yeah, yes, Thiana, it's the same in Spanish. And the only reason why I said in English is because there are some languages like French that don't have syllable stress. They have equal syllables. So not all languages have the same syllabic stress that English does or that Spanish does. And exactly, Spanish is one such language. And if you plan to practice in Southern California, it is probably a wise idea to know something about Spanish, because a third of our population in most counties, and in some counties more than a third of our population, will be native Spanish speakers. So it's good to familiarize yourself with that if you will practice in the state of California. Yeah, if I talk to you, Magda, if I talk to you about intensity in the video log, really talk to me about intensity. If I talk to you about pitch, tell me about pitch. You don't need to tell me about the relationship. But if I tell you something like you going from the word content to content, it's true that most speakers will do both, raise the pitch and raise the volume. Does that make sense? So in this case, we're doing both. But if I give you a question that's just about pitch, you should know how to do that without changing intensity. Okay? All right, everybody. So that's the example for word level stress. We can also use it, and I gave you this example, I think, in another way, to mark sentences. You know that when we talk, it's different than when we write. When we write, we get the benefit of a question mark to tell our reader that we're asking a question. We get the period or the exclamation point to give a definitive, declarative sentence. So a sentence that ends with a period or an exclamation point is what we call a declarative sentence. I'm declaring it, period. An inquisitive sentence is one that I'm inquiring, which means it's a question mark. When we talk in spoken language, we don't get the benefit of periods and exclamation points and question marks. Our vocal folds are what do that for us in spoken language. Your vocal folds are your punctuation. So when I say the relationship is over, this relationship is over. So if you are really adamant and you don't want this person to have any guessing, and you say, this relationship is over, That over declarative sentences end on a down sweep. We have to relax the vocal folds because what we need to do is lower the pitch. That's a very important marking in oral speech around, hey, I'm not messing around, and this is the final thing I'm saying about it. You could just hear it there too. It's the final thing I'm saying about it. It goes down. It's basically saying this is the end of that. And our vocal folds are doing that job. That's very different than the relationship is over. Now listen, if you're trying to tell your significant other that you're done with their crap, you don't want to say the relationship is over. What you really want to say is the relationship is over. Bye. Drop the mic, right? If you don't do that, if you raise the pitch, you're letting your significant other say, no, but wait, I'm still invested. And you're like, oh crap, that's not what I meant. I don't know if these analogies work for you. I'm just joking, please no. But hopefully it makes sense to you. When you don't want to mince words, your pitch goes down, okay? If you want to ask a question, your pitch goes up. And folks, just so you know, there's been a phenomenon in the United States over the last 2 decades or so where females tend to do what we call upspeak at the end of the sentence, where they raise their pitch rather than lower their pitch on sentences. Pay attention when you walk around and see if you're seeing people do that. It's been a greater trend over the last couple. Yes, and a lot of speech language pathologists have noticed. Yeah, so rather than saying the relationship is over, everything sort of sounds like a question. The relationship is over, and then I blah, 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 and then I went to the store, and I bought some apples. So it's sort of an intonation pattern that is lending itself to inquiry rather than just declaring. I went to the store, I bought some apples, I'm dropping on that, right? Because I'm giving you a declarative sentence. And it is fascinating. It shows you what happens over time, right? So certainly if you have a younger patient, you'll want to pay attention to that. It might not be a neurological problem that they're having. In older adults, I might think they might be having a hard time regulating their pitch, and I'm looking for that. So it's just something to pay attention to. Finally, we also, in sentences, maybe, no, I don't, Daniel, know why it's happening. I don't know if it's like a sing-songy, hey, I'm happy mood. I don't know. I really don't. The last component of language stress, I think it's, yeah, last component of language stress, we use our vocal folds in very subtle ways to mark where we want people to pay attention in the sentence. So let's, and it's often in a confirmatory manner. Let's say we're in a noisy room and you said, I looked like I had a great time. If I didn't know if I couldn't hear very well, I might start to mark some stress to make sure I understood you. I looked like I had a great time? Versus, were you saying she looked like she had a great time? So let's say the words she and he are close. She looked like she had a great time, or he looked like he had a great time? Who were you talking about? I look like I had a great time? I really had a bad time. So we also mark it on certain words when we want people to pay attention, right? I look like I had a great time. So I'm keeping time up there because it's a question. I still need to elevate the pitch on time. But if what I want my listener to do is focus on great, I also have to increase the pitch there. I look like I had a bad time. So you can see that I hold it up on both of them. I hold it up on bad because I'm highlighting for my listener that that's the word I want them to focus in on. And then time, because it's a question. I look like I had a bad time. Does that make sense? So I'm increasing volume, I'm increasing pitch to let my listener know where I want to draw their attention in my sentence. Does that make sense? All of that is happening from tensing and relaxing the vocal folds and holding them in the closed state if I'm doing volume. And then finally, we use our vocal folds for a lot of stuff. Yeah, Theana, it is definitely subconscious. We're not consciously aware of these things that we're doing. They're not at that level, but it's voluntary. The brain is certainly voluntarily doing this task. The final thing that we use our vocal folds for, and we do it a lot, is marking emotion in our conversation. Like to say to somebody, yeah, sure, whatever you want to do. You know, so your friend says, hey, I know we were going to go to a restaurant tonight, but would you mind going to a comedy show instead? I need my mood lifted. And you say, sure, whatever. That's your emotional tone on that word. Now, let's say your friend says, you know, I know we were going to go to a restaurant tonight, but I got a better offer to go to a comedy show with one of my other friends. Do you mind? Whatever. Okay, that's a totally different tone. And what I'm conveying to you is that I am not very happy with the choice that you made. I'm conveying an emotional tone, and I'm doing that by changing my pitch and changing my volume. The difference between whatever and whatever, okay? I'm using my vocal folds in a different way to convey some stress components, whether I'm changing my pitch or changing my volume, to convey to you the way I feel about what you're telling me. So those tiny little vocal folds that you think about adducting to create a voice sound and abducting to create an unvoiced sound are also doing all of these elements of tensing and creating subglottal pressure and staying in the closed phase throughout the entire sentence, all the way across. Think about the animation I'm using right now in talking to you. All the way across the sentence, those little vocal folds are tensing and relaxing and holding a longer closed phase to convey all kinds of linguistic and emotional stress for you to understand the meaning of the words and my emotional tone behind conveying them to you. If your brain is not like supercharged into thinking this is the most exciting field because it's crazy what our anatomy is doing, just stop for a minute and really think about it. It's crazy. So in our field, what you're learning right now is the norm, is what we do normally. But in our field, we're talking about pathology. So what you're going to start learning when you move on in this field is what happens when this all goes wrong. What happens when a patient has a neurological injury and they cannot control their vocal folds? You can see already that they may have voicing problems. They may have an inability to convey their emotional tone to other people and to mark linguistic stress. So just a preface to that, there are patients, for instance, who have certain kinds of brain injuries that cannot mark emotion. So everything that they say sounds flat, even though they're saying, yes, I love you. Yes, I'm angry with you. Yes, I'm happy. Yes, I'm sad. It all sounds the same because they cannot mark the stress pattern. So these are things that we will be working on with the patient to try to overcome and to try to help reinfuse into speech because they're so important in conveying a message to someone else, right? That we're reading them a lot. So this is basically just putting it all together, folks. I've given you a slide on, and you can go back and listen again from the beginning of the last section that we were in, respiration. Don't forget, because on the summary video log, you're going to have to map respiration now to the whole phonation, right? So when you're studying, make sure you put it all together with what are my volumes and capacities, what stages of respiration, what am I doing with timing, what am I doing with muscular contraction, and then mapping that onto, and for this video log, it's just phonation. But for the summary video log, you're going to have to do the whole system because we have to pay attention to all phases. What are we doing with respiration? What are we doing with phonation? So far, we've talked about respiration, volumes and capacity, stages of respiration, timing, muscular contraction. How do we change those? Now we're talking about phases of phonation: attack, sustained phonation, termination, the general purpose to voice or not voice? And what muscles are we using? The adductors and the abductors. And then we also have to change pitch and volume in order to do some things to help us with language and to help us with emotion. Does that make sense to everybody? Any final questions before we end today? Folks, you're going to be getting my course evals within the next couple days. And before next week, which is my last week with you, right? Because you have the assignment for phonation. I want to ask you to please fill out the course evaluations so that you can tell me, how did my videos help you? How did the lectures help you? The assignments. If you did not like something, the only thing that I ask of you is to please clarify why, so that I know what to do about it. If you did like something, I welcome your input so that I can continue that for future students. And if you become a student in our graduate program, I will of course want to continue those strategies that you found to be helpful when you're with us. Okay? Folks, you know where to reach me. If you have questions, send me an email. If I do not get back to you right away, it must be because I somehow missed it. So don't hesitate to write back within 24 hours and say, hey, Sue, I don't know if I fell through the cracks. Okay? All right, folks? I wish you the best in studying. I'm glad that you loved the class. And I wish you the best moving forward. If you need anything in the next week, reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you. All right, folks, have a great week. Bye now.